Welcome to the Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help. Today, we're going to be talking about ways to get over writer's block. So if you struggle with procrastination, or if you're worried about getting started and actually producing something, you're going to want to stick around. Hey guys, Pete, Paul, how's it going where you are?
Really good.
Yeah, doing good, thanks.
Yeah.
Where are you guys off to this weekend? We're recording this on a Friday, so it's nearly the weekend. Where are you headed off to?
Well, I always look forward to the weekend. I'm always happy when it's Friday, and especially tomorrow on Saturdays. Quite often I go out to city centre, to Vigna del Mar, which is next to Valparaiso, where I live. I usually go to a cafe to start with, to do a bit of reading, just relax, try to forget things. And what about you, Paul?
Well, at this moment, the weather in my city has just turned from warm, crisp, post-summer autumn, which is really just extended summer, turned right overnight into cool and rainy, and it'll rain until March. So, but I work at home all week, and I'm usually very eager on the weekend to get out and do something, even if it's just menial shopping or something. But to be honest with you, I've lived here so long, and Vancouver is, although it's a nice city, it's small. I've kind of run out of things to get excited about. So although I have to leave the home just to make some variety, I'm probably just going to go out shopping, have a coffee, and then probably just come home and do some of my own writing, because most of the work week I'm working with students and I don't have a lot of time for my own stuff. Phil, what do you got planned?
Yeah, that's good. I actually just typed the words "the end" to a manuscript I'm working on, so I'm happy with that today. I'll be getting back to some editing and writing on it next week, I think, but I'm going to take the weekend, especially Sunday, to enjoy. And yeah, I'm planning on heading off for a hike somewhere. I mean, the weather's still pretty good in Gran Canaria, and I need to get out of the city because it's quite easy to get trapped in this long, thin city by the beach. I mean, it sounds like a nightmare, right? But it's good to.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
It's good to get out into the hills, have a hike. That's my plan. But yeah, coffee is always another big plan for me, and going to a cafe is a nice idea.
Sounds like it's also a time, the weekend, maybe this weekend in particular, is a time when all of us kind of turn to our own writing. Is that true for you guys both?
Usually, yeah, for sure.
Pete?
Yeah, so I do a bit of writing at the weekend, definitely. What I'm interested therein is that I think you said, Paul, that you go out, have coffee, but then you write at home, right? So I'm thinking, some people might actually write when they go out in a cafe. Others prefer to stay at home to write. What about you, Phil? Like, where do you write?
Yeah, I think for fiction, to force myself to consider it as something that I have to do, I go to the library twice a week. I'll often work on it in other places too, but I really find that helps, because when you don't have a hard deadline, when you don't have a boss breathing down your neck to finish your writing, then yeah, it's good to consider it as a kind of job. If I go to the library, I'm going to feel like an idiot if I come back with 0 words and just sit there for 2 or 3 hours doing nothing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's interesting also that you talked about deadlines, right? Because I think that, working with deadlines and working without deadlines is totally different, right? So, journalists, if you're listening, you know that you have very tight deadlines, and that is often going to affect your writing processes, your habits, right? But that's also different to when you're training, right? So if you're, you're learning to write in English as a foreign language, you're not necessarily at the stage where you have deadlines to publish in English yet, right? That might come later, right? What do you guys think about that? How does that affect writing habits, writing processes, whether we have deadlines or not?
It's a great question. I think it really connects directly to our topic today, right? About how do we get past problems of procrastination and writing blocks. Yeah, maybe guys, we should actually talk quickly at first about what is procrastination and writing blocks in your experience, both yourselves and with your students. What are your thoughts on that, guys? What is this thing we're talking about?
I think there's many reasons for writer's block or a writing block or people procrastinating. Certainly in creative writing, it stems from imposter syndrome or thinking this isn't going to be a wonderful best-selling novel, so what's the point in starting? I think to try and boil it down to one thing of what causes a writer's block, it's seeing the finished project, the finished piece of writing as one and not as a series of steps. So when a task is that big, it's mountainous, especially if we're talking about writing in a foreign language, like Pete said, right? If you think, oh, I've got to produce this portfolio, or, why don't I write an article in English? It just seems like an absolute mountain to climb if you can't visualize it in smaller steps. So yeah, that's what I say causes blocks from my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Pete?
Pete?
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying there. I mean, often what happens with my students is they're so used to the product, right? As I say, they have to meet these deadlines when they're writing in their own language. They have to do everything super quick. Then when it comes to writing in English, on the one hand, they have to get over that fear of writing in a language and get out of that mindset of worrying that they're making mistakes and how that's going to look. So have to go over that. And on the other hand, like what you're saying, they have to realize that it's not the product right now that is important. What's important is the process. So they're training, right? They have to take it step by step. The writing process is much longer now, right? And yeah, they should. I think one of the things about getting over the fear of making mistakes in a foreign language is, first to concentrate on meaning, right? So really choose the topic, right? Hopefully, you're going to choose a topic that you know a lot about, right? Because if you know a lot about the topic in your own language, right, then the next step is you can read up on it in English, right? Make some notes, right? Record, highlight some key vocabulary. And then that is going to be much easier then to think in English when you start to write. And when you start to write, concentrate, as I said, on meaning. Just get some ideas on the page, right? And think about it also as an interactive process. So if you're working with a teacher, with a coach, step by step, just get main ideas on the page and then send it to the teacher, right? Get some feedback before you move on to the next step.
I think in my own case, my own experiences with procrastination with both my clients, students, and myself, I see all the things you guys are talking about in my own experience. When I work with students, for example, they're usually academics or students in university. So they have hard deadlines assigned to them. And if they experience procrastination, it results from, oh, the project is too big and where do I start? And I'll never be good. And it's too stressful. And I have other classes to write about and read and so on. And so it comes from that sense of the daunting task with the time pressure. And in my own writing, which is largely creative writing, it's a very different scenario because I have no deadline. No publisher is lining up to publish anything that I write. So absent the deadline, any kind of procrastination I experience comes from that imposter syndrome that Phil's talking about, where I feel like it's not worth it. No one reads anymore. That enters my mind. Or nobody wants to read about the themes and characters I write about. They all seem focused on this in the publishing world now. So why bother? So sometimes I will procrastinate in my own work, and inevitably I'm pulled back to it because there's a strong passion and need to write that compels me back to it, regardless of those sensations. I'm not afraid of the daunting size of it. I get infected with that imposter syndrome. Like, why bother? It's not going to go anywhere.
Do you impose any deadlines on yourself, like any smaller deadlines, or you say, let's finish this section by this date or something like that?
I do. And I also set up deadlines, arbitrary deadlines. Well, not arbitrary, but sort of constructed deadlines with a writing friend of mine, where we exchange chapters or essays with each other, and we commit to meeting or exchanging files on a certain date. And of course, no one gets in trouble if that doesn't happen, but not wanting to disappoint your friend, especially if they're going to submit something to you, that keeps you, that holds you accountable for production, right? Getting something written. I do not suffer from the thing where, because I understand the process of writing deeply as a coach and a writer, I'm not troubled by the sort of, it'll never be good, so why bother? Like, I can never write like F. Scott Fitzgerald, so why should I write page 1? I understand that the first draft is going to be crap, and that's okay, and give myself permission to write. But I do get into that thing where I start thinking on the macro level of the publishing industry, and no one wants to read a story about what I have to say anymore. But the deadlines are helpful, especially with creative writing, which can meander forever. Phil, do you have that? Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting the parallels that we're talking about between our own writing and our clients or people who are writing in a different language. Maybe they have extra struggles that absolutely anything can seem like a mountain, even if they've got these great professional skills that they're putting to use in their first language. And writing in English can seem like a mountain. I wanted to touch on what Pete said about going step by step. I just had a thought that was kind of interesting, that a lot of what I do as a coach isn't actually building people up. We often think of as coaches, right? You're getting people to do the repetitions so they get stronger and get great at what they do. It's actually breaking things down. It's taking a piece of writing and say, don't worry about this all as one thing. Let's just look at this section. Let's look at this section, or let's do this one exercise that can improve, something about your writing game, your English. And it's often about just being able to break things into manageable chunks and motivate people to do those to consume those small chunks of improving at writing. I'm not sure that's a great metaphor, consuming chunks, but just do those little steps.
I think that that is the key to overcoming that sense of the daunting challenge. I often refer to a photograph I have of a mountain. I think it's one of the mountains in Everest, and I have this photo with a sort of pathway to the summit, just kind of sketched on it. And I always present that to my students and say, the project you're working on is the summit. So don't look at the summit, because you're not going to get there in one day. Instead, let's break our hike down into hikeable chunks that we can do each day, then set up camp. Because if you were hiking to the summit of Everest, you wouldn't do it in one day. You'd break it into manageable chunks, as you're saying, right? That look less daunting, feel manageable, and become little mini deadlines, right? Like let's get 2 kilometers up the slope by sundown. That's doable, right? And when you get there, you feel the sense of accomplishment that can propel you to the next thing. Does that resonate with you in some way, Pete?
Yeah, definitely. So I think by breaking it down into smaller chunks, like we're talking about, like you say, that seems less daunting, and therefore, when you comes to the moment that you're going to write, you're less anxious. And I really wanted to focus on that too, because probably you'd agree that an anxious mind is not the best mind to express yourself, right? To let your writing flow onto the paper, right? So I think that's really important to get into the right frame of mind before writing. So you can do things like I don't know, go for a walk, listen to some relaxing music, into that calm state of mind before writing. That's the first thing. And then I'll also say, following on what I was saying about this process, right? So, once you've chosen a topic, right, you've read up on the topic in English, you've made notes in English, you've highlighted, recorded some key vocabulary. So you have ideas in English, you're ready to think in English and write in English, and then start, right? And don't stop, right? Just keep writing, let it flow. And don't worry about anything to do with grammar. No, just focus on meaning. You might write for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Just keep writing until you've run out of ideas. Don't rewrite, don't reread, don't edit before you get to that stage.
Is this an idea of like the Pomodoro technique, right? Or the hourglass technique? I mean, people have different names for it, but usually if you can do 5 minutes of deep concentration, you'll continue because you're then in that zone where you can just and probably for multilingual writers, they're also in the zone of English, not just in the zone of writing, right? When you're writing, they're not starting to think of a phrase in Spanish or in French and then translate. They're actually producing things maybe more naturally in English when they write to how they would say it in a conversation. I mean, I'm not sure.
I wonder, guys, if we can think of the solution to the procrastination and block. Can we think about it in terms of, like, it seems to me what we're talking about are like work habits and writing processes. Like the process of writing will be the techniques of getting ideas onto the page, but the habits are related to your lifestyle and your scheduling and things like that. I wonder, what I'd like to know from you guys with your experiences, maybe we can say personal experiences and student experiences, because we're native speakers of English, but our students aren't. Do you think, what are your work habits? We talked about going to cafes on the weekend, for example. My own personal writing habit is what I call ass in chair, which is waking up in the morning where it's quiet and I don't have a lot of distractions, because once everyone else has woken up, I have lots of distractions. And whether I'm inspired or not, whether I have ideas or not, whether I'm tired or sick or whatever or not, I do the work by putting my ass in the chair and just writing. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, it'll probably be bad. But that for me generates the ideas. And like you said, puts me into that zone where my concentration is fixed on whatever I'm writing about. And when I prescribe that for students too, although some of them, if they're professionals, that can be more of a challenge. If they're a student, it is the student life of a student writer is finding a place and a time where you can be alone with your ideas, and work it into the schedule regularly so that you don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about being anxious in that loop, because you're going to do it regardless. It's like having a job, as you said, right? if you have a job, some days you don't want to go to the job, but you do it anyways because people are counting on you. And if you treat your writing habit as a job, I think the anxiety can dissipate somewhat, because it doesn't matter how you feel. You're doing it anyway. You have to do it. It's a commitment to your craft. Phil, does that make sense?
I mean, you touched on so many things like accountability and the, ass in chair and taking emotions out of it. I think it depends on the kind of personality you are. If you like that organization, if you're someone who responds to praise and to possible carrots, benefits that you can give yourself. I mean, just touching on what you said about scheduling, I highly recommend that. I mean, with all my students, I say, if you use an online calendar, get your learning and your development, professional development, your writing, your homework, whatever it is, into the calendar at a sustainable time. I'm not talking about 5 hours on a Sunday. You're not going to want to do that. You want to enjoy your Sunday. So half an hour at lunch break, or twice a week doing an hour of writing so that you can get that English article finished. And if you get it in the schedule, I think you're right. You take the anxiety out of it, and it just becomes, this is an appointment that I have to keep, and you're more accountable. Yeah. Pete, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, great points from both of you. I wanted to build on them a little bit. So on the one hand, I think you have to get to know yourself. Right? For example, what part of the day are you more active, more creative? Yeah. Some people it's in the morning, some people it's in the evening, at night. Right? So that's important. For example, I'm more creative, more active in the morning. In the afternoon, I start to lag a little bit. Right. But for example, my partner, she's awake at night. Right? She's like an owl. Right? So it depends on the person. The other thing is, I like this idea of routine. Right. So you always know at a certain time of day in a certain place, you're going to sit down and you're going to just get on with it. It's a routine, and that works. On the other hand, we don't, as Phil said, it does depend on personality too. And some people, they can be more creative if you take out a little bit of the structure, right? What happens to me sometimes is, for example, I want to write some content on social media, for example. And I'm just thinking about it, and suddenly I have some inspiration. And my mind starts to create all these ideas and build on them. And I'm like, I have to get this on paper now, right? I think that's good too. So you take out a little bit of the structure and you allow yourself to be spontaneous. And that can be a really good way of starting the process. You just start, as I say, and don't stop until those ideas have run out.
I even think, Pete, that those practices feed into each other. I find that if I do the daily work, and for me it's the morning, if I do that, it feeds my thinking for the rest of the day, and gives me confidence because I know that I've done something today. I've pounded out a paragraph or a page, so I feel accomplished. But having placed my mind in there at the onset of the day, it's activated something, so that during the day, if I'm walking around or in the shower or in the exercise room, or even, to be quite honest with you, with other people, the ideas are churning. And, then the notepad is always nearby, or the recorder on the phone, because those ideas generate. If I don't follow a morning schedule devoted to writing, those ideas come less frequently. So I always recommend that to my students also, by the benefit of having a schedule, that it also feeds into the sort of subconscious or unconscious creativity that will happen through the rest of the week. Does that make sense to you guys? Phil?
Yeah, I mean, great point. And I haven't really talked much about social media and writing on social media, and it's such a big part of what people do. I mean, I know, Paul's big on YouTube, and Pete and I use LinkedIn a lot.
Love what you guys do on LinkedIn, by the way.
Thank you. Right back at you, Paul, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about, you were talking, Paul, about just it feeding your creativity, giving you a sense of accomplishment. If you can acknowledge a writing task that you've done, I've sent this well formatted and like functional email in English. Well, well done. That's great. And having the balls and the gumption to post and to share something about your life is
very courageous.
You're right, Paul. And I think one of the difficulties with social media that creates blocks is everyone's comparing themselves to these influencers or these great writers or these successful people who are, pumping out seemingly wonderful writing every day or very, very quickly. And that's something that can make multilingual writers anxious and nervous about sharing what they do. Sometimes True. I agree with Pete. I mean, let's be spontaneous, and you don't have to be perfect. Post something, get something down. If it doesn't get a good reaction, you haven't lost anything. I mean, as long as you're not being offensive or silly, then it's fine to write what comes to mind. And I think, sometimes that's a good idea.
Pete? Absolutely.
Just build. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, building on that. I think when you're writing on social media, people's confidence can be a little bit fragile. Yes, it's happened to me, right? So I might spend all this time creating this post. I've put so much into it, so much thought into it. I posted it and it didn't really get engagement, right? And that's not really good for our confidence, right? Our self-esteem. So I think we have to be careful with social media and posting things. I think that my mindset now is to test things, right? Not to spend too long, because as I say, the more you put into something, if it doesn't get engagement, it doesn't make you feel good. Right? On the other hand, if you have an idea, why not limit the time you put into it? Just get it out there, test it, right? And if it gets quite good engagement, you think, hey, actually, I didn't spend a long time on that. It got good engagement. That gives me confidence. And then I can build on the same idea. And I know I have a better idea that's going to work. And it's going to be worth my time.
I agree with both of you guys about the hazards, but also the benefits of using social media and this idea of putting it out there. Maybe it's time to mention something that I think can be a useful element for a writer, a student writer, is forming a sort of limited out there, a writing community where everyone can feel safe. I don't know if you've participated in writing workshops in the past, but I have. Yeah, and they're amazing because everyone gets to know each other and respect each other. Everyone is expected to produce on a schedule, and you get feedback, which is fantastic. And of course, it's terrifying. And of course, eventually someone critiques your work and you disagree with them, or maybe you think they're full of shit or something. But that's part of the learning, how to produce courageously, output it, and accept criticism, positive and negative. I just want to touch on something and mention someone. A young lady named Maki in Japan has started an online writers challenge. She calls it Writers Carvings. And it's growing for her. And it's a little virtual workshop where people can join in the challenge of writing challenges they have. And she'll put up a prompt and everyone contributes and then shares their work in a limited community. And some of them, after some time, take the work they produce and then put it out on the wider social media networks. I think that's a really cool idea to get someone used to producing and sharing, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of workshops and communities that writers can get involved in. I mean, I'd point out that even if it's a group like a Facebook group, or a group on another platform, or even like a Web3 kind of operation, that's a place where learners can feel safe to ask things. Just be it grammar question, uses of words, check a sentence. That can be such a great support, because I think what is missing for a lot of multilingual writers is just that. I'll also take this opportunity to plug my own amazing writing workshop. Not because I want to plug it so much, but just because it's a creative writing workshop that's, again, from a prompt. Writers from around the world come along. We meet once a month on Zoom, but it's been really great for me to see people who haven't written creative writing before, and their English level is might be intermediate or upper intermediate, but they're able to produce something, and they're so happy that they can do that. And I think on their own, they wouldn't have the impetus to do it, but in a group of people who are going to support them, they've created a great story, and it's really been nice to see that over the last few months.
That's fantastic.
Is that something you've done yourself, Paul, or you've sort of heard about other?
A little bit. I have heard of some things like that. There was a kind of an annual challenge that I participated in way back in 2010, and it was out of the UK. It was called 1 Million Short Stories, I think. The 1 Million Short Stories Project. And it was a kind of a virtual workshop, and everyone would submit and share and critique. It was 2010, so there weren't as many social media venues. But and then what would happen is they would publish hard copy or paperback copy of the top 10 that everyone voted on. And one of my oldest short stories was published that year, and I thought it was really exciting. But the great benefit was everyone was producing material all the time, and that's very motivating. And this reminds me of something that maybe I forgot to say it earlier, but when we're talking about scheduling, when I work with these academic writers and they have these hard deadlines, and they say, "Teacher, I need help. I have a deadline and I can't get started." My first job at hand is to start them, get them started on something. In academics, of course, there's research involved, so that may be a first step. But I find, especially with students that are working in English as their second or other language, that dauntingness of the challenge stops them. But then I ask them in initial interviews, I'll ask them, "So when do you usually start writing?" And they'll say, "Oh, like when I have like 5 days left, and then I'm so stressed out." And I said, "Well, yeah, you should be stressed out. You run out of time, right?" The mythology of the all-nighter before deadline is really harmful, I think. So I would tell them, okay, so you get stressed out when you have 5 days left to submit, naturally. So what's working against you then is time. So let's create as much time as possible by starting as early as possible in advance of the deadline. And sometimes that just never occurred to them because they had developed the opposite habit in high school or something of like writing the night before. And so, for example, I had one student working in university, studying at university, working on a project, and they had 3 months to write a research paper. And they came to me on day 2 of the assignment. They had been assigned the project, and they contacted me after 1 day. So they had almost the full 3 months left. And they said, how should I plan this? And when should I start? And I said, "You're starting right now. Let's get to it." Because, in my presence, they just hammered out a rough draft. 10 pages while I stood there. We were together in person, not online. And it was kind of a sort of a taskmaster approach. But the beautiful thing was they had pounded out 10 pages in a few hours of just babble, nonsense. But there were some beautiful little pieces in there they could build on. And they had started. And now they had 3 months to make that piece of garbage better. And they loved that feeling because it just released so much stress because they felt like they had 3 months to write it. Does that make sense? that make
Sure.
resonate with you guys? Have you had something similar to that happen?
Yeah, actually, I'm
Creating
really
your own
interested.
time?
I'm really interested in this topic. I mean, procrastination, right? It's basically to do with anxiety. And what you were saying there was really interesting. You said that when people at school, they get into this habit of procrastinating, right? You're at school, right? For a lot of people at school, studying, doing assignments is not really cool, right? So they kind of like postpone it, pretend they don't care, right? A lot of them do care, right? And they, like you say, at the last minute, they hammer something out. And if it works for them, it might work. It works for students, right? So they'll hammer it out the night before and they'll do okay. And the problem is that then that becomes a habit, right?
Yeah.
And then later in life, the same habit does not necessarily bring the same rewards.
That's right.
So I think this is to do with being really mindful. Right? Be really mindful about your writing habits, right? What you Paul is, he said by starting early, right? You get something done early, you feel good, right? So I'd say to people, be mindful of that. Be mindful of what makes you feel good, what doesn't make you feel good. Realize that as an adult, right, when you're procrastinating, you're leaving the writing process until too late, like you said, like 5 days before a deadline. Observe, right, with your consciousness that you actually feel super stressed, right? By doing that, then your mind will learn to not keep doing it, right? You can actually break that habit and get a more rewarding habit, which is what you've been talking about. Start early, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And that starting early accomplishment feeling is taking note of that so you can remember that as a future incentive. Like, I want that feeling, not the stressed out night before feeling. And I also made a point of them with that particular story. Because they had experienced the sort of anxiety of comparing themselves with other students. And like you said, in high school, they were sort of the smartest kid and they could get by doing an all-nighter before deadline. But of course, at university, everyone is the smartest kid from their high school. And it's not going to be good enough to produce quality work. So I reminded them of that. And I said, okay, tomorrow at school, ask your friends like, hey, when are you going to start your essay? And they'll say, oh, like, next month. And you get to say, I've already done a draft. And remember how smug you get to feel. And let that be a little bit of a motivator, right? You get to be, well, I've got a draft already done, and you guys are just pushing it down the line. If that helps you in that world of comparison, I think it can be effective, giving yourself the gift of smuggery or something.
Unless they're going to say, can you do mine as well? You just
right.
It probably will. I was going to say that it's about priorities, right? With all these deadlines, and especially with school, but also with work. We don't get very good education, I didn't, on prioritizing things, especially with our digital lifestyles. We get, suddenly there's a new deadline, there's a new message, there's a new, project to take your attention away. So, one of the things I don't like is when people say I didn't have time, because the reality of that is it wasn't a priority. You didn't make something a priority. So I think that's something necessary for writers to really break that habit of just doing what seems most important and actually effectively prioritizing things. Interesting what you said about the taskmaster approach of just sit there and get that draft done. I think definitely that can work for some people, and it's great if you can produce something and have it there. I mean, my approach might be a bit different, that I would like to get these smaller tasks done. So with a big project like this, research paper that your student had to write, I might suggest something like creating a framework or creating a list of resources that you are going to use, doing something to just reduce that anxiety level of, oh, I've got it all to do. I mean, if you've got a solid plan, I mean, I know for me this is true. If I've planned a piece of work, I think I can do this. No matter how little time is left or how much time is left, I feel like you're less anxious about getting started and actually doing it.
I wonder if I mischaracterized that experience with that student, because it does kind of fit in with what you just described. My intention was to get them producing something, anything, even if it's never useful. But I also used that first draft that I think we spent 3 hours together, and I just working on stuff while they sat there and wrote. We were in a private room on the campus, and I just told them, write the essay as if it were one of those exam essays where you don't have reference materials. You just write what you know. So they had this research paper to do, and they were stuck. So I said, write everything you know about this topic and just go. And so they produced 10 pages of what they knew about it. And I said, from there, you can now determine what you need to research, because you have claims and statements that are unsubstantiated. So now you know where to start your research. And as you just said, Phil, from that, we can now determine a plan and an outline and sort of the key points that are really valid or interesting and those that weren't, all from just that rough thing. So it really is a kind of a brainstorm exercise from which we can build a template of, like you said many times, breaking down into little pieces that are manageable, right? Research this statement, substantiate that claim, find out more about this topic, because clearly off the cuff, they didn't know enough about that. So that was just one sort of technique of what am I thinking? Like gestation, just getting something percolating and get them moving.
People will think you're a magician if you say, tell people to sit in a chair and they come out with 10 pages. That's
pretty crazy.
It's a great claim to have.
But they were really desperate, and they were paying a lot because it really meant a lot to them, and they had just no idea. As we've been talking about, they had just developed such poor writing habits in high school, and the education system didn't teach them how to prioritize or schedule or plan or outline or break things down. They had no method. And all of this was in their second language, right? Pete?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that this is also the interaction between reading and writing, or researching and writing in the context of academic writing. So yeah, I was saying that you choose your topic, right? You read up on it in English, make notes in English, but also this is interactive. So the danger is that if you think that process is like fixed in that order, the danger is that you never finish the reading part because you're procrastinating. Right? You might think, oh no, I need to read more. I need more vocabulary. I need more ideas before I start writing. And you might just procrastinate and never get onto the writing. Right. So what you said there, I think, is really important. That if you already know some stuff on a topic, and you should do, because as I say, you should choose a topic you know something about. Right.
Yeah.
Then try to start quite soon, as soon as you can, actually getting some ideas on paper. And as I say, just start writing. Don't stop until you've run out of ideas. And then, like said Paul, then you can actually you can see like where your gaps are, and say, I need to develop this idea a little bit, so I'll do a little bit more reading. Right. So yeah, I think this is important to realize that this is this interaction between reading and writing. Right? It's not in a fixed order, back and forth.
And I think another thing that is important, we remind our students. I've discovered this. I wonder how you guys feel about this, but I always remind them, because they have this habit, especially in their second language, of being over editorial, always correcting things, and the idea never emerges. And I try to encourage them and teach them how to push the editing process way down the line. That's something we can do the night before if we have to. But the content and the ideas and the meaning and the depth of their the depth of their expression needs to come first. Do you guys have that same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was saying, so I mean, really focus on meaning first, right? Get your ideas on the page. Then I would say, develop those ideas and also look at coherence. Right? So you might, when you actually start the editing part, it might be that you're moving ideas about, right? But you're still focusing on meaning, right?
Yeah.
And it really, like you said, towards the end of the writing process is when you want to, first I would say, start, as we say, cutting the fluff, right? We talked about this, I think, in the last episode about making sure that you're being really concise, take out a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, I would say, is when you want to, concentrate on grammar, form,
right?
Basically, that would be like right near the end. And at that stage, don't be afraid also to use some tools, right? So there's some really good tools. Like we got the app Grammarly. We've got, for example, if you use Microsoft Word, it has a good editor, right? You can use those as tools to support, to help you with the grammar, but use them wisely. Right? So don't let them do the thinking for you, right? Make sure that you are really paying attention to, why are they correcting this? Why is this tense wrong, right? So you don't want to depend on them. You want to actually use them as support to actually help you to get better.
That's a great point about the apps, Pete, in that, a lot of content writers I know are heavily using AI because it's so helpful in them putting blocks of paragraphs and ideas together. One of my clients said to me just this week that she turns off AI, like Grammarly, because it really stops her flow. It's constantly saying, oh, there should be a comma there, or you've spelled that word wrong. And it's just constant red lines. I mean, that's going to give you that anxiety if even if your first language is English, let alone if it's not. I mean, also to touch on what you said about coherence, I think that's so relevant for my clients as well, because they're putting together these blocks of content, these paragraphs, these sections, and sometimes they're not connecting them in as effective way as possible. So, for some people, maybe writing a block or putting these things together isn't too much of a problem, but, they might get blocked once they've almost finished an article and say, now it just feels like I've got 3 separate articles. What's the link here? I mean, my solution for that would be to plan effectively, to do that planning stage, and maybe to use a checklist as well, whether that's before you start writing, or during, or even after. And that checklist can help you go through those stages that you were talking about, Pete, with the editing, and maybe leave that hard English stuff like the spelling and the language stuff until last. What do you think? You're nodding your head there.
I really like the idea of the checklist. I also wanted to build on what you're saying about these apps like Grammarly. I think it's a really good idea to turn it off during the stage where you're focusing on meaning. Grammarly is going to distract you, and you're going to be editing too soon. It's going to stem your creativity, right? And then also, because I've had students who are actually reluctant to use the app because they think that they need to learn by themselves. So what I say to them is that the thing is that if you don't use these apps at all, if you don't have that support, the danger is that you make a lot of mistakes in your writing, but you don't actually differentiate between which of those mistakes are actually errors because you have a knowledge gap, right? And which are just like little slips that actually you know that they're wrong, but you just weren't paying attention. Right?
Great point.
That's the danger there. If you don't use this support, then it just becomes like kind of one mess of all these errors. And then if you're working with a coach, with a teacher, it's more difficult then to like sort out like where do you need the help? What are your knowledge gaps? is this error just like a slip? Actually, you knew it was that, or is it something you need more help with? So that's why I would say that, really using these apps, I think is really useful these days, but we have to use them in the right way. So to summarize, I would definitely say turn them off while you're creating, right? While you're focusing on meaning, and then turn them on towards the end of the writing process to give you that support so that you can then categorize. You can say, right, these mistakes, actually, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why that is a mistake. I need help with this. These just little slips. Done, corrected.
It seems like we're really touching on this idea of writing in stages, right? And there is an editing stage, and then there's a revising stage where you deal with coherence, and then there's just the production stage. It reminds me of an experience I had at a language school when I first became a teacher, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to get my feet wet, and I also wanted to make myself valuable. So I asked the director of academics, "What are the courses that no other teacher wants to teach?" And she said there was a research paper writing class to prepare students for university. I said, "Done. I'll take it." And I said, "What is the issue here?" And they said, "Well, it's a lot of extra work. There's tons of feedback." And I said, "What are the big challenges with the students?" And she told me that in the previous, we call them sessions, but they're basically mini semesters, the students were not finishing the project. Very few students were actually finishing the curriculum project. They weren't finishing a research paper. I said, "Okay, done. That I know how to solve that." And I didn't really know how to solve that, but I figured out that the most important thing was creating a schedule of stages. And so at the beginning of the class, the very first day, I handed them a schedule, a 4-week schedule. In 4 weeks, they had to produce a research paper. I gave them the page count. It had to be between 7 and 10 pages, and number of sources they needed. And each week was broken down into these chunks we've been talking about, or these hikes on the mountain. And each week had was a very specific stage. The first week was developing they had to choose a topic. So they choose the topic, develop their attitude towards it, come to a thesis. Week 2, no writing yet, really. Start the research, develop an outline, sketch the writing out. Week 3 was all writing, just 24 hours a day, writing. And then week 4 was editing, polishing, submitting. And I used that as a template that they could then apply in university. This 1 month template, they were finishing. They were all finishing. In 1 month, they had written at least 10 pages. They always exceeded 10. It was incredible. Some of them got up to 27 pages. And I said, that's something you can hang your hat on, because when you get to university and the professor says, this is due in 3 months, you feel confident because you're like, well, I did it in 1 month in Paul's class. I can do this. And they could take that 4-week template and spread it across 3 months and still get started in the first week and know the benefits of that experience. And I've kind of applied the same approach to other one-to-one coaching I've done ever since. This idea of setting out stages. And when you're in that writing, the first writing stage, no Grammarly, no apps, no spell check, ignore it. And then the onus is also on me never to mention it, never to point out a spelling error, never to give feedback on grammar in that stage, so that they don't become worried about it and they get conditioned to disregard it and just focus on their ideas and developing them,
Good point.
Anyway, yeah.
I think with even with a lot of writing guides, we don't see like the process of writing built up as steps. Yeah. It's often, here's a load of tools that you should use to become, the next Stephen King. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's not particularly helpful, is so many people are seeing successful writers, be them journalists, social media influencers or great digital writers or academic writers, novelists, whatever, and they see their success as that one story, that one thing of, oh, they wrote a book and here it is. And we never hear that story of all of these writers of what stages did they go through, what steps did they go through. And I think that's what's going to block so many of the people that we interact with.
Absolutely. Pete?
Yeah, I was just going to say that everything you were talking about there, Paul, it sounds to me like task-based learning. So you always have the end goal in sight, right? You know, like why you're doing what you're doing. You've got the product at the end, right? But the process is very clearly marked in stages. And I think one problem also that students have is that when they're taking English classes, right? English as a foreign language classes, a lot of the time, this task-based learning is not implemented, right? So there is not like an end goal, an end product for classes, right? It's just like basically learning some grammar, right? Doing some skills, but there is no process that leads to an end product. So yeah, I think that is something that students need to get used to doing, basically. And like I say, that way they really the process only makes sense, right? It's motivating because you've got the end goal in sight.
Yeah, I think that also gives us a measure of whether a technique or a process or a habit is effective or not, is whether it achieves that particular goal, right? Just lost my thought. Pete, go ahead, jump in. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry. Just talking about this task-based learning, right? Instead of this kind of general English training, right?
The old turn to page 79.
Yeah. I guess that's what I was going to say is without a clear goal in mind, how can you know if a technique is effective or not, right? It's effective based on the result you're trying to achieve. And you want something to be able to measure that. I think we've lost our way in English education because of the focus on tests, but a test of any kind is merely, or a project for that matter, is a way of measuring how well you've developed. But you're right, the focus on task-based learning is so powerful because it gives you something, and especially in writing, it gives you something that you have written. And just going back before we run out of time, Phil, I wanted to mention one of the first things I do with any student I work with in coaching is I remind them of exactly what you just said, is that when you see a book and you think, oh, this is so beautiful, that's a textbook, but I'm thinking literature, for example, and you think, oh, Garcia Marquez, he's so beautiful, the words just flow out of him, he's a genius. We create this myth of this born genius, and we create this idea for the student that, well, we have to work against this mythology that the great genius sits down and pounds out a magnificent first draft, and that's their gift to the world. We need to remind them that guy is human too, like anyone else, but their great talent is their love of being in the chair doing the work. They just love the process of writing, and we never see that. We see the final product, but that final product, no matter how gifted the writer is, and there's some level of that, they've probably produced several drafts or variations of that final product that's so magnificent. And we have to show that to the students and break down that myth, because that myth, I think, creates the block. I'll never write like that. It's impossible. And so my first thing I always do in coaching is just talk about that myth and maybe get some quotes from writers who write 10 drafts or something.
Maybe even with writing as well. I mean, I think, with language as well, because I think talented is a bit of a dangerous word. This kind of,
I hate it.
Talented writer, talented linguist. I don't believe in it.
I hate it. Me too.
I agree with you, Paul. I think let's try and do away with that and focus on the steps that people can take and have to take to actually make it work.
I agree. I really dislike the word talented. It has a religious ring to it, that someone has granted you the talent. I don't know any babies that can write. They may have a predilection for language skill as a genetic neurological component, but they still have to learn and practice the craft.
I think we can agree on that. Babies are not talented writers.
No.
Can I just agree wholeheartedly with both of you? So, because this, for me, to do with this idea of the two types of mindsets, right? There's the fixed mindset and there's the growth mindset. You want to develop the growth mindset, right? The fixed mindset is all to do with, believing that you were like born a writer or you were born not a writer, right?
Yeah.
Like you're talking about talent, right? And what you can really empower yourself by, first knowing that you have talent, right? But even if you're not the most talented writer, that does not mean that you can't become a really good writer. If you have this growth mindset, all these writers, we only get, like you said, Paul, we only get to hear about kind of the result, right? Garcia Marquez, amazing writer. We don't hear enough about all the process, like what did they do to get to that stage? And this is all about growth. So I think I would really, really insist on people watching this, believe that you can develop, and you can develop as an English writer. Absolutely. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that only English native speakers can be good writers in English. It's not true.
That's right. I agree 100% there, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's another stigma that hopefully this podcast is addressing, but we should talk about that elephant in the room at some point that, so many editors are saying, native journalists only or native writers only. And it's something which is ridiculous in 2022. So I don't know, maybe we can talk about that a bit more in a future episode, because we're running out of time. But I wanted to ask you guys, have you got one quick piece of advice that you can offer for anyone listening who's struggling to get started with writing in English?
Mine, I'll just go back to what I said earlier. For me, it's just about ass in chair. If you're struggling to get started, put your butt in the chair and start. But start anything. Take the pressure off yourself. Know that the first thing you write is going to be crap, but it's going to loosen the gears and get the gears turning. So ultimately, there is a bit of self-discipline involved, or getting that motivation from a coach. But the key to starting is starting. It sounds kind of pat, but the challenge is just start writing something with no pressure to produce anything of value. The value is in getting started. So that's, for me, whether it's scheduled or taskmaster in the room with you, or just assuring yourself I'm going to do it tomorrow morning and having someone check on you, whatever the case, the key to starting for me is starting, knowing that it's going to be crap, giving yourself permission that the first thing you produce is garbage. For me, that's a tremendous weight off.
That's very empowering for a lot of people listening as well, I'm sure, because they're just so worried about it being crap. And here we are saying, it's okay, everyone, get going.
The first thing I ever write, no matter what project I'm working on, I know the first thing I write is going to be terrible. I'm never going to show it to anybody, but it gets the balls rolling, the gears turning, whatever metaphor you want. And that's the reward, getting started.
Yeah,
so that's what I would say.
Also that, Paul. So because one of my takeaways would be work with someone, right? So we were talking about workshops, right? Or coaches or teachers, right? Also, your coach or teacher does not expect that first stage to be brilliant. Probably, like you say, it's going to be crap, right? But it's the first building blocks to build on, right? Yeah. So your teacher's not going to judge you on that first stage you sent them. All right. So that would be my takeaway. Don't rush the process, right? Developing writing skills is time consuming, right? So take your time, break it up into stages, take time over those stages, interact, get feedback from a group, right? In a workshop, or a teacher or a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And build on it step by step, develop your skills, take your time, and you'll get there. Remember, growth mindset.
People who are going to be supportive of others, right?
Yes.
Again, another quick story is I had another client recently saying somebody had given the advice that she shouldn't embarrass herself, that she should give up. And I thought, the kind of person who gives that advice has never written a damn thing in their life, and they've never learned the language, and they're not being constructive and not offering any kind of value. So totally agree with you, Pete. It's great to work with supportive people, be them colleagues or friends or coaches or whatever. And I think that's what can hold us accountable and make people support us as well. And I guess my takeaway, I might mention again that writing checklist, having something to work from.
Great idea.
So that you can, just tick off a couple of little tasks. Yeah, I've done that and I'm making progress, and, I can get started.
All great stuff. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, guys.
Yeah, it's been another great one. So, thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll see you next month, I guess. Have a good month, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you.